subscribe, comment. Because once you step inside this story, there's no way out without knowing the truth. The smoke was still hanging in the air when the first guards dared to step back inside La Sabaneta Prison. Dawn crept over Maracaibo, casting pale light across a yard that looked less like a correctional facility and more like a battlefield. The riot had burned itself out sometime before sunrise, leaving behind twisted metal, shattered concrete, and bodies scattered where men had fallen hours earlier. Official counts would come later, but even at a glance, it was clear that more than 100 inmates were dead. Some had been locked in their cells when fires spread. Others had been caught in crossfire from weapons that were never supposed to exist behind bars. La Sabaneta wasn't just overcrowded. It was abandoned. For years, guards had learned an unspoken rule: do not enter the cell blocks unless absolutely necessary. Entire wings of the prison were governed by inmate leaders known as prans, men who controlled food, protection, punishment, and life itself. They carried pistols, machetes, even grenades, smuggled in through corruption so normalized it barely raised eyebrows anymore. The prison was a city within a city, and the law stopped at the gate. The riot began as a dispute between rival gangs over territory inside one of the main blocks. Witnesses later said it started small: shouting, threats, a single gunshot echoing down concrete corridors. Then the locks failed. Or were opened. No one could say for sure. Within minutes, armed groups were storming rival sections, fires were set to flush enemies out, and panic spread faster than the smoke. By the time authorities regained partial control, La Sabaneta had revealed its true nature to the world. Leading the initial investigation was Inspector Rafael Urdaneta, a veteran officer who had spent 2 decades chasing organized crime across western Venezuela. He had seen massacres before, but nothing like this. As he walked the perimeter, inmates stared back at him, not with fear, but with calculation. They knew something the outside world didn't yet understand. Among the dead was a man named Luis El Gato Moreno, a mid-level gang enforcer whose body was found near the administrative corridor, far from his usual territory. That alone was strange. Moreno had survived years inside La Sabaneta by staying invisible, loyal, and cautious. He wouldn't have crossed into enemy ground without protection, or a reason. Urdaneta noticed something else. Moreno wasn't killed during the height of the riot. The timing didn't match. There were no burn marks, no signs of panic. Instead, he'd been executed cleanly, hours earlier, before chaos erupted. Someone had wanted him silenced. As investigators combed through the ruins, whispers began to circulate among surviving inmates. The riot, they said, wasn't just about territory. It was a cover. In the days leading up to the violence, tensions had risen over a missing shipment, guns and cash that had entered the prison but never reached their intended hands. Moreno had been involved in tracking it. He had also been talking to someone on the outside. Phone records confirmed it. In the week before the riot, Moreno had made multiple calls to a number linked to a former prison guard dismissed for corruption. That guard, now vanished, had once overseen access to the armory corridor, the very area where Moreno was found dead. Late that night, as Urdaneta reviewed surveillance footage salvaged from a damaged control room, a technician called him over. One camera, long assumed broken, had captured something just before the riot began: a guard unlocking a restricted gate and stepping aside as armed inmates moved through, calmly, deliberately, as if following a plan. But when they zoomed in on the guard's face, Urdaneta felt his stomach drop. It wasn't just any guard. It was someone who was never supposed to be there at all. By the time Inspector Urdaneta replayed the footage for the 5th time, the room had gone silent. The guard's face froze on the monitor, grainy but unmistakable. He had been declared dead 2 years earlier, killed in a supposed robbery gone wrong. His name was Jorge Salinas, a former corrections officer with deep ties to contraband routes and inmate leadership inside La Sabaneta. A man officially buried, now seen opening gates that led directly to mass slaughter. If Salinas was alive, then the riot wasn't just tolerated by corruption. It had been engineered. Urdaneta ordered Salinas's file reopened immediately. The robbery report was thin, rushed, and never fully investigated. No autopsy photos. No body ever positively identified. The death had closed too quickly, signed off by a supervisor who now conveniently worked in another state. Every layer peeled back revealed another compromise. Inside the prison, tensions spiked again. Word spread fast that authorities were asking questions about Moreno and the missing shipment. 2 inmate witnesses scheduled to give statements were found beaten within hours, alive, but silent. One of them scribbled a single word on a scrap of paper before being moved to the infirmary, Salida. Exit. Urdaneta knew what it meant. Something, or someone, had been moved out during the riot. As night fell, investigators searched a sealed maintenance tunnel beneath the administrative wing, a passage officially decommissioned years earlier. The air was thick with soot and rot. Halfway through the tunnel, they found drag marks leading to a reinforced door welded shut from the outside. That alone was damning. Prisons don't seal doors from the wrong side unless they're hiding something. When they cut it open, they didn't find bodies. They found crates. Empty weapon crates, stamped with military serial numbers that didn't belong to any inventory on record. This wasn't prison contraband anymore. This was state-level firepower, funneled through a system designed to pretend it couldn't see. As Urdaneta cataloged the evidence, his phone rang. It was an anonymous number. The voice on the other end was calm, almost bored. "You're asking the wrong questions," the man said. La Sabaneta was never the problem. It was the solution. The line went dead. The following morning, one of Urdaneta's junior analysts failed to show up for work. Her car was found abandoned near Lake Maracaibo, keys still in the ignition. On her desk, investigators later discovered a half-finished report linking Salinas to an offshore shell company used to launder money through prison supply contracts. She had been following the money trail, and someone noticed. Pressure mounted from above. Officials urged Urdaneta to limit the scope of his investigation, to focus on riot management failures rather than criminal conspiracy. He was told, politely but firmly, that destabilizing public confidence could have consequences. When he refused to back down, his access to internal databases was abruptly restricted. Still, fragments of the truth kept surfacing. A confidential informant inside the prison confirmed that Moreno had uncovered a deal between inmate leaders, guards, and outside traffickers. The riot was scheduled weeks in advance, designed to overwhelm authorities while select prisoners and cargo were quietly extracted. Moreno had threatened to expose it, believing he could bargain for protection. Instead, he became the first body in a massacre meant to erase him. Then came the final blow. Late one evening, Urdaneta returned to his office to find the walls stripped bare. Files missing. Hard drives gone. On his chair sat a single manila envelope. Inside was a photograph taken hours before the riot. It showed Moreno alive, standing beside Salinas in the tunnel, shaking hands. On the back, written in black ink, were 5 words. "You were never meant to see." As Urdaneta stared at the image, alarms began blaring across the city. Another disturbance had erupted inside La Sabaneta, this time in a block that had supposedly been secured. And somewhere in the chaos, a man officially dead was moving freely, cleaning up the last loose ends. The alarms didn't stop. They layered over one another, a constant mechanical scream that echoed through Maracaibo as police units raced back toward La Sabaneta. But this time, Inspector Urdaneta didn't follow the convoy. He knew better. The prison wasn't where the truth ended, it was where it began. Instead, he drove south, toward a decaying industrial district near the port. The shell company tied to Jorge Salinas had a registered address there, a warehouse listed as inactive, forgotten by zoning inspectors and swallowed by rust. Forgotten places were where ghosts liked to hide. Inside, the air smelled of oil and seawater. Stacked pallets lined the walls, most of them empty. But in the center of the warehouse sat a folding table, a laptop still warm, and printed manifests stamped with the same military serial numbers found in the tunnel. This wasn't cleanup. It was an operation still in motion. Urdaneta didn't have backup. Most of his team had been reassigned. Officially, this was no longer his case. Unofficially, it had become personal. A voice spoke from the shadows. "You should have taken the warning." Salinas stepped into the light. Older than the man in the footage, but unmistakable. Alive. Untouchable in the way only protected men ever are. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't need to. Salinas explained it plainly. La Sabaneta was never meant to hold inmates, it was meant to manage them. Gangs were allowed to rule because they were predictable, controllable, useful. Weapons came in, violence went out, and the chaos justified budgets, contracts, and disappearances. The riot wasn't a failure. It was a reset. Too many people had started asking questions. Moreno was one of them. You can't expose a system, Salinas said. You can only replace the faces. Sirens wailed outside. Not police. Private security. Salinas smiled. This is where you decide what kind of ending you want. Urdaneta did decide. He triggered the warehouse fire suppression system, flooding the space and shorting the laptop. At the same time, he transmitted every document, every photo, every recording he had to multiple international journalists and human rights organizations. The story didn't belong to Venezuela anymore. In the chaos, Salinas vanished. Within weeks, the fallout was impossible to contain. Investigations spread beyond La Sabaneta, reaching courts, military suppliers, and political offices. Officials denied everything. Arrests were made quietly, selectively. The prison was officially shut down months later, its name becoming shorthand for institutional collapse. Inspector Urdaneta was reassigned to a desk job. No explanation. No commendation. Just silence. 3 months after La Sabaneta closed, a weapons cache was discovered in a coastal town outside the city. Same serial numbers. Same routing method. And buried beneath the crates was a body, newly dead, carefully placed. The man was never identified publicly. But Urdaneta recognized the face immediately. Luis Moreno had been silenced to protect a lie. Jorge Salinas had survived to maintain it. And La Sabaneta, despite its closure, had already done what it was designed to do. They thought the monster was behind bars. They were wrong. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one.